The story begins with a 911 call that comes in just after 2 a.m. on a cold November night. A man's voice is on the line, shaky but urgent. He tells the dispatcher that his girlfriend Hannah is missing, that she stormed out of his apartment after an argument and never came back. The call doesn't raise alarms immediately. Couples argue, people leave to cool off, and often return within hours. But the following morning Hannah's car is still in the apartment lot, her phone is left on the couch, and her keys are on the counter. By midday, she is officially reported missing. Detectives arrive at the apartment Ethan shares with Hannah. He greets them at the door looking disheveled, running a hand through his hair, and asking if there's any news. He explains that they had a fight, nothing unusual, and she left around midnight. He waited for her to return, but when she didn't, he panicked and called 911. He offers them her phone, points to the couch where she left it, and insists he has no idea where she went. To investigators, he seems worried but cooperative. They take his statement and move on to other leads. The first potential suspect is a co-worker of Hannah's, a man named Jason who, according to text messages, had been overly persistent in pursuing her. He had sent late-night messages, some of them aggressive, and Hannah had told a friend she was worried he might not take rejection well. Detectives question Jason, who claims he hasn't seen Hannah in weeks. But phone records show that on the night she disappeared, he sent her a message asking to meet. Jason admits to it but says she never replied. His alibi checks out. Surveillance footage shows him clocking into a night shift at work at the time Hannah supposedly left Ethan's apartment. The suspicion shifts elsewhere. Next, detectives follow up on a report from a neighbor who swears they saw Hannah walking down the street alone that night, heading toward the main road. This sighting suggests she really did leave the apartment as Ethan claimed. The problem is the cameras along the street don't capture her at all. It's as if she vanished after stepping into the dark. Still, investigators pursue the lead, canvassing the area and pulling footage from local businesses. Nothing surfaces. Meanwhile, Ethan continues to present himself as the grieving boyfriend. He shows up to vigils, he hands out flyers with Hannah's face on them, he speaks to reporters with a trembling voice about how much he misses her. He even attends a community search effort, combing through wooded areas with volunteers. The public sees him as a man desperate for answers. Police quietly note his cooperation, but their focus remains on finding Hannah alive. Days pass and suspicion drifts toward the possibility of a stranger abduction. A truck was spotted idling near the apartment complex that night. Witnesses describe it as dark-colored, possibly a pickup. Detectives track down the owner, a middle-aged man with a history of petty crimes. They bring him in for questioning, but his story checks out. He was visiting a relative in the area, and records confirm it. The truck sighting fizzles out. For nearly 2 weeks the investigation circles dead ends. Jason the co-worker, the supposed stranger in the truck, the mysterious disappearance into the night. All while Ethan remains on the periphery, playing the role of the grieving partner, never once pushed as the prime suspect. But then a small inconsistency begins to surface. Detectives reviewing Hannah's phone find a half-written message in her drafts. It reads, "He won't let me." The rest of the sentence was never finished. The discovery of the unfinished draft unsettles investigators. The words, "he won't let me," could mean anything. It could refer to Jason, the persistent co-worker. It could refer to a controlling family member, or even to Ethan himself. Detectives don't jump to conclusions, but they take note. They begin quietly revisiting Ethan's timeline. He had told them Hannah stormed out around midnight, but one neighbor claims they saw Ethan's car leaving the lot just after 1 in the morning, headlights off. When confronted with this, Ethan insists he only went out to clear his head. He says he drove aimlessly for a while and returned before sunrise. The detectives log the statement, but without physical evidence, they can't do much with it. Attention shifts again when a friend of Hannah's comes forward with new information. Hannah had confided weeks earlier that she was planning to leave Ethan, that she felt controlled by him, that he always wanted to know where she was and who she was speaking to. The friend says Hannah was building up the courage to move out. This revelation paints Ethan in a different light, but investigators tread carefully. Emotional disputes are common, and suspicion without evidence can cloud judgment. Still, the draft message on the phone now seems heavier. Forensic teams begin re-examining Ethan's apartment. They notice faint traces of blood on the bathroom tile, small enough to be overlooked during the first sweep. Tests confirm it's Hannah's. Ethan explains this easily, saying she cut herself shaving a few days earlier. It's plausible, and without more, they cannot disprove it. Then, a potential breakthrough comes from traffic cameras. A dark sedan resembling Ethan's is captured near an industrial park outside of town at 2:30 a.m. on the night Hannah disappeared. The footage isn't clear enough to confirm the license plate, but detectives note the similarity. They question Ethan again. He doesn't deny driving that night but claims he stayed near his apartment, circling the area while thinking about the argument. When asked directly if he went to the industrial park, he shakes his head and says no. The answer is calm, too calm, and the detectives file it away. Meanwhile, the public narrative is still one of mystery. News stations run stories about a young woman vanishing in the middle of the night. Some speculate about abduction, others about a runaway case. Ethan gives interviews, his voice low, his eyes downcast, repeating lines like, "I just want her home," and "I'll never stop looking." The performance strengthens his image as a grieving boyfriend. But detectives, reviewing the footage in private, begin noticing subtle slips in his wording. He speaks of Hannah in the past tense more often than in the present. He refers to her as someone I loved, not someone I love. 2 weeks into the investigation, search teams comb the wooded areas near the industrial park. It is there they find disturbed soil, a patch of ground inconsistent with its surroundings. Digging reveals what everyone feared. Hannah's body is recovered, partially concealed. The discovery turns the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide. Now the pressure shifts back to Ethan. The man who presented himself as cooperative, grieving, and supportive is suddenly standing in the shadow of mounting evidence. He is asked to come in once more for questioning. This time, the tone in the room is different. The interrogation room is quiet when Ethan sits down, a bottle of water placed in front of him. He leans back in the chair, arms folded loosely, trying to project calm. The detectives enter without a word, setting down a folder thick with documents. For the first 20 minutes the questions are soft. Tell us again about the night Hannah left. Walk us through it one more time. Ethan repeats his story almost word for word, as if rehearsed. They argued. She stormed out. He waited. He drove around to clear his head. He came back. His tone is steady, even sympathetic, as if he understands the need to go over it again. But the detectives aren't listening to the words, they're watching the pauses, the fidgeting of his hands, the way his eyes flick away when certain details come up. Phase 1 of the interrogation plays out like a script. Ethan is the innocent boyfriend, patient and cooperative. He says things like, "I loved her more than anything," and "I'd never hurt her." His voice cracks at times, just enough to sound convincing. But detectives don't interrupt. They let the silence stretch longer after each answer. They watch him fill the gaps with more talking, small contradictions slipping into his narrative. He says Hannah left at midnight. Then he says it might have been closer to 11:45. Later he says 1 a.m. The timeline bends in his hands, and each time it does, the detectives mark it down silently. Phase 2 begins when they introduce the traffic footage. They slide the blurry still image across the table, the silhouette of a dark sedan captured near the industrial park. "This looks a lot like your car," one detective says casually. Ethan leans forward, squints, then shakes his head. "That could be anybody's. Half the town drives the same model. You can't even see the plate." His answer is calm, but his fingers tap the table in a rapid rhythm, a small giveaway of rising nerves. They don't push. Instead, they move on, asking about his drive that night. Did he stay close to home? Did he go anywhere unusual? Ethan answers quickly. "I just drove around the neighborhood. Didn't go far. But the seed has been planted." Phase 3 begins when they shift to Hannah's phone. They slide over the printed draft, the incomplete message, "He won't let me." Ethan stares at it for a long moment, his face blank, then forces a small laugh. "She probably meant Jason. She told me about him. He wouldn't leave her alone. That's what this means." But the detectives don't agree or disagree. They just let the paper sit there in front of him, the silence amplifying its weight. Eventually Ethan adds, or maybe she just wrote it during our fight. She was upset. People say things they don't mean when they're upset. His answers are plausible, but they're stacked, one excuse over another, and the cracks are beginning to show. Pause. The detectives lean back, shifting their tone. One of them says, Ethan, we've been doing this a long time. People lie. People make mistakes. But the truth always comes out. The words hang heavy in the air. Ethan swallows hard, takes a sip of water, and replies, I'm telling you the truth. I don't know what happened to her after she left. His voice is steady, but the room feels different now. He's not guiding the conversation anymore. He's reacting, scrambling to patch holes before they widen. Then phase 4 begins, the collapse. The detectives place a new photograph on the table. It's Hannah's bracelet, recovered from the shallow grave. Ethan's jaw tightens, his body shifts slightly back in the chair, and for the first time his voice falters. That could have fallen off anywhere. She wore it all the time. The detective nods slowly. But it was found buried with her, Ethan. In the same soil that covered her body. Silence. Ethan looks down, his lips pressed tight, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. He rubs his temples as though the weight of the evidence is physical. When he finally speaks, his words are softer, less rehearsed. You don't get it. She was going to leave me. She said she was done. Said she'd tell people what I was really like. How I watched her, checked her phone, told her where she could go. She wanted to make me look like a monster. I couldn't let her do that. His voice breaks, his hand trembling as he grips the water bottle. I just wanted her to stop. I didn't mean for it to go that far. The room falls silent except for Ethan's uneven breathing. The detectives exchange a look, the kind of look that says the case has just shifted from circumstantial suspicion to undeniable confession. The minutes after the bracelet is revealed stretch into hours. Ethan doesn't confess right away. He doubles down, backtracks, invents explanations that dissolve as quickly as he speaks them. He says Hannah must have left the apartment after their fight. He says someone else must have followed her. He says maybe Jason, maybe a stranger in the truck, maybe anyone else but him. Every story grows thinner than the last. The detectives let him talk. They let him spin his web wider and wider until he tangles himself in contradictions. At one point, Ethan insists he never left the apartment after midnight. Minutes later he admits to driving, but only around the neighborhood. Later still he swears he never went near the industrial park. When shown the traffic footage again, he stares too long before saying, "That's not me." It is the pause, not the words, that betrays him. The detectives don't shout. They don't slam the table. They use silence like a weapon. Each time Ethan answers, they wait. The wait forces him to fill the void with more words, and with every sentence, he reveals more than he intends. He tries to portray himself as rational, as careful, as a man who loved Hannah deeply. But in that effort to appear controlled, he slips. She was screaming so loud, he mutters once, before catching himself, snapping his lips shut. The detectives freeze. Screaming. One of them asks softly. Ethan shakes his head quickly. I mean yelling. During the fight, she was yelling at me. But the damage is done. He just admitted to being present during her final moments. Another slip comes when discussing Hannah's phone. Ethan says, she dropped it when she hit the floor. The detectives stare at him. They never mentioned her phone being dropped. They never mentioned a floor. The silence that follows crushes him, and his face goes pale. He tries to correct himself, I mean when she stormed out. She dropped it before leaving. The correction is clumsy, and both detectives know it. The camera records everything. Hours pass. Ethan grows restless, his voice cracking from fatigue. His confidence fades. He begins talking about how Hannah had been pushing him, how she never listened, how she was trying to make him look weak. The detectives remain calm, almost sympathetic. One of them leans forward and says, Ethan, accidents happen. But burying someone, hiding them, lying to everyone, that's not an accident. That's a choice. Ethan's breathing quickens. His hands tremble. Finally, he lowers his head and whispers, I didn't want it to happen. I didn't mean to. But the detectives don't let him stop there. They ask, "Tell us what happened, Ethan. Start from the beginning." The story pours out, fragmented at first, then steady. He says Hannah told him she was leaving for good. That she had packed some things and said she'd never come back. He begged her to stay, to talk it through, but she refused. The argument escalated. She called him controlling, manipulative, said she was tired of living like a prisoner. Ethan snapped. He admits he grabbed her by the arm, blocking the door. She pulled away, shouting that she was done with him forever. He pushed her back in frustration, harder than he realized. She stumbled, hit her head on the corner of the table, and collapsed. Ethan says at first he thought she was unconscious, but when she didn't respond, panic set in. He knelt beside her, shaking her, begging her to wake up. There was no response. He checked for a pulse and claimed he couldn't find one. His voice breaks as he recalls that moment. "I knew she was gone. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want it to be real." But what he did next sealed his fate. Instead of calling for help, instead of reporting what had happened, Ethan dragged Hannah's body to the bathroom. He wrapped her in a blanket, placed her in the trunk of his car, and drove out under the cover of night. He chose the industrial park because it was deserted, a place where he thought no one would look. He dug a shallow grave with his bare hands and a small garden shovel from his trunk. He buried her bracelet with her without noticing, thinking he had covered his tracks. Then he drove home, washed his hands, and waited until morning to make the 911 call that would start the illusion of innocence. The detectives sit in silence as Ethan relives every detail, his voice low and flat, as if he is narrating someone else's actions. When he finishes, he leans back, exhausted, whispering, "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to listen. I didn't want it to end like this." But the irony is clear. Ethan had spent weeks playing the role of the grieving boyfriend, standing in front of cameras, handing out flyers, joining search parties, insisting he knew nothing. He believed he was smarter than the detectives, smarter than the process, smarter than anyone who doubted him. Yet in the end, it was his own arrogance that betrayed him. Not the evidence, not the witnesses, but his own words, his own slips, his own inability to maintain the lie under pressure. He outsmarted himself, and the truth surfaced in the one place he thought he could control, the interrogation room. When the trial begins, the confession is played for the jury. His words, his contradictions, his breakdown are all on record. The bracelet, the traffic footage, the disturbed soil, all support the story he tried so desperately to bury. The defense calls it an accident, but the jury sees through the performance. Ethan is found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. The story of Hannah's disappearance becomes a cautionary tale, not just of a controlling relationship turned deadly, but of a man who thought he could lie his way out of reality. In the end, he didn't just lose Hannah. He lost his freedom. He lost his mask. He lost to himself.